Welcome everybody to the Senate Budget and Taxation Subcommittee on Education, Business Administration, joined with the House Appropriations Subcommittee on Education and Economic Development. It's great to be here again with Chairman Barnes and his subcommittee, along with Vice Chair Solomon. Today we will be hearing a number of budgets, starting off first with the Maryland State Department of Education headquarters. Before we turn it over to the analyst, I just want to remind everyone, if you have a question, please utilize the raise hand feature under the reactions tab. And before we go any further, Chair Barnes, is there anything that you'd like to add or any comments?
Nothing preliminary, thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. So with that, we'll turn it over to Laura Hyde to present the analysis for the Maryland State Department of Education headquarters. Ms. Hyde.
Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen. And hopefully you can see this.
We see it. We see it just fine.
Excellent. Starting on page 1 with the budget summary. And MSDE's fiscal 2022 budget increases by $16.4 million or 5.8% to $299 million. For the fiscal 2022 allowance, this amount includes $101.7 million in general funds, $10.5 million in special funds, $183.3 million in federal funds, and $3.4 million in reimbursable funds. If you turn please to Exhibit 5 on page 10, which is Board of Public Works reductions. This chart shows you that due to the financial strain caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, the Board of Public Works approved the fiscal 2021 reductions in July 2020. For MSDE headquarters, these cuts included a reduction of 10 positions and $2.1 million in salaries and wages, as well as $6.3 million for contractual services. Contractual services cuts included $4.7 million for a contract to educational testing services for MCAP assessments that were not administered in spring 2020 due to COVID-19, as well as $1.4 million for a contract to maintain legacy information systems and $50,000 for a research contract at the Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center. These general funds reductions totaled approximately $8.2 million for the agency. If you please turn to page 11, which is Exhibit 6, Overview of Agency Spending. Overview of agency spending is for the fiscal 2022 allowance, and this exhibit shows this allowance by division and program. The Office of School Effectiveness budget is $159.8 million, and this budget includes the Division of Rehabilitation Services, Juvenile Services Education, the Division of Student, Family, and School Support, and Certification and Accreditation. The Office of Teaching and Learning receives $101.3 million in this budget. The Office of Finance receives $16.7 million. The Office of the State Superintendent receives $15.5 million. The Maryland Longitudinal Data System Center receives $2.4 million. And the Office of the Inspector General receives less than 1%, approximately $900,000. If you'll please turn to page 16 under Personnel Data. This chart shows that MSDE had 2 rounds of personnel cuts between fiscal 2021 and 2022. In the July 2020 Board of Public Works cuts, regular positions decreased by 10. And then in the fiscal 2021 and 2022, the agency cut an additional 9 regular positions. Currently, MSDE has 172 vacancies, which is approximately 14% of its total personnel complement. And despite the agency's budgeted turnover rate increasing this year to 8.52% in the fiscal 22 allowance, most of the general fund vacancies are in juvenile services education, and the remaining vacancies are federally funded. You'll please turn to page 18, Exhibit 8, under Issues. This chart displays CARES Fund distribution as of this year, starting in calendar 2020. In order to combat COVID-19, Congress passed the CARES Act in March 2020, which divides funds into multiple sources, 3 of which applied to K-12 education in Maryland. The Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Fund, ESSER, the Coronavirus Relief Fund, and the Governor's Emergency Education Relief Fund, or called GEAR. These three sources were subsequently divided by the state and MSDE into multiple separate grants, which totaled $453.5 million. These distributions are actually part of the Aid to Education Innovative Programs budget and were distributed through that budget, even though we're talking about them in the MSDE headquarters budget. So as seen as this chart, you can see that the governor also recently announced that the Maryland School for the Deaf and Maryland School for the Blind receive an additional allotment in the next round of GEAR 2 funding. If you could please turn to page 19. DLS recommends to the budget committees that MSDE report on the following fund distribution from CARES, which are MSDE administrative costs from the ESSER fund, LSS, seed school, MSD, and MSB costs related to school reopening from the ESSER fund, costs related to urban and rural broadband, and competitive innovation grants for educational institutions with innovative approaches to addressing the COVID-19 pandemic from the GEAR Fund. If you'll please turn to page 20 under digital learning. Following school closures due to COVID-19 in May 2020, MSDE issued Maryland Together, Maryland's Recovery Plan for Education, which contains suggestions on how local school systems might best facilitate remote learning, reopen schools safely, and facilitate hybrid, which is a mix of remote and in-person learning. In addition to this guidance, MSDE started the Digital Learning Advisory Committee, and I want to point out that it is called the Advisory Committee, and they met several times under the direction of the Deputy State Superintendent for Teaching and Learning to provide local school systems with information and guidance on this emergent important topic. So due to the importance of this topic, DLS recommends to the budget committees that this advisory committee submit a report on its work in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, focusing on remote learning challenges and remedies for teachers and students. Additional information and updates, including recommendations, are in the remaining sections of this document. And I thank you very much, and I stand for questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Hyde, for that thorough and very good analysis. Are there any questions for Ms. Hyde? I don't see. Chairman Barnes, do you see any on your end?
I do not.
Okay. Well, thank you again, Ms. Hyde. We'll now turn to Dr. Karen Salmon, State Superintendent of Schools, along with the Deputy Superintendent of Finance, Ms. Brandenburg. Welcome, Madam Superintendent.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Chairman Zucker and Chairman Barnes and members of all the committees. I'd like to take this opportunity to also thank Laura for her very concise analysis. Before we respond to the analysis, I just would like to thank you all, the legislature, and also the governor for the continued commitment to education funding. The magnitude of the impact of COVID-19 pandemic on our students, families, teachers, schools, and school systems is really immeasurable. It may be years before we know the exact impact on student learning and well-being and the corresponding long-term impacts and cost implications for districts. However, it is clear that the needs of students in Maryland are greater than they were prior to the onset of the pandemic, and the additional support is necessary. COVID-19 has created an unprecedented disruption of education in our state's history, affecting all 900,000 learners across the state. The crisis exacerbated pre-existing educational disparities for our most vulnerable children and youth, particularly for children with disabilities, English learners, and low-income students. Our local school systems have had to continually adapt, innovate, and overcome obstacles within a very short time frame. While the COVID-19 pandemic has stayed with us for longer than anyone imagined, and all of us are fatigued, we must remain energized and work together to support our districts and students to make it easier to implement the strategies that are sustainable for students, teachers, and districts. Now I will respond to the analysis. MSDE is in agreement with the performance discussion concerning the closeout report and the MCAP report. We can provide a report on the CARES Act funding as requested, with the exception of information on the rural and urban broadband grants, as this program was handled completely through the Department of Housing and Community Development. The Digital Learning Stakeholders Committee was dissolved many years ago after completing its charge. There is now a Digital Learning Advisory Committee, and although their names are similar, the committee is an outgrowth of a State Board of Education appointed committee with a completely different charge. This new committee is an active and engaged committee that was originally established to examine and expand online course opportunities across our state. Now this committee is focused on all the factors associated with teaching in a virtual environment. MSDE will be able to provide a report with much of the information that you requested. However, we cannot do all of it, but we can provide all the identified needs across the state, the program recommendations. We will also provide updates to the pilot Eastern Shore Virtual School, a summary of local school digital survey, which talks about all of the devices and broadband opportunities that are available to currently all of our students, and the state strategic framework for digital learning. Lastly, concerning the recommendation to add a provision to transfer $235,000 in improperly encumbered general funds from the Maryland State Department of Education, MSDE respectfully disagrees. The Maryland State Library was formerly the Division of Library Services and Development within MSDE. For 2018, fiscal year 2018, MSDE served as the fiscal agent for the Maryland State Library as the Maryland State Library transitioned from the Division of Library Services and Development within MSDE to its own state agency. The Division of Library Services and Development issued a grant to a local government during this time frame. MSDE sought information from the Maryland State Library regarding the open grant and received information in January 2021 that the grant should be closed. MSD has closed the grant, releasing the encumbrance, and the funds will revert during the fiscal year 21 closing process. As such, the provision to transfer $235,000 in encumbered general funds from the Maryland State Department of Education is not necessary. Also, before we get to any questions that you might have, I want to take a moment to reiterate the independent nature of the Office of the Inspector General for Education. Chapter 771, Senate Bill 1030, established this office as an independent unit of the state. While MSDE acts as a fiscal agent, we do not have authority or oversight concerning this office. And now I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Madam Superintendent, I do see some questions, but so how many schools? So we have 24 schools right now that 24 jurisdictions. How many schools currently have in-person classrooms at this point?
According to our data that we received every Friday, and last Friday data is the most recent that we have. According to that data, we currently have 16 schools that are open for some in-person instruction. And that varies, Senator, across the state, from having fully hybrid instruction in Carroll County and places like Somerset County to having small groups in other places in the state, like Frederick County. And so that's currently the distribution right now.
And then out of those 16 school districts that are open, how many of the educators have been vaccinated within those school districts?
I don't have that information, Senator. We know that in certain districts, 100% of the educational staff have been vaccinated, which includes bus drivers and cafeteria, food service custodians, but it varies across the counties, and I don't have that information. That would be something hopefully our local health departments could provide.
I fear, but who keeps an eye on all the local areas of education? Is that you?
What do you mean, sir?
In other words, who is the one that is keeping keeping track of what the local education agency area schools are doing in terms of curriculum and going back to school. That would be you all, right?
Yeah, that is the State
Yeah.
Department, yes.
So I think the two biggest things right now that are happening in the state is obviously recovery, right? I mean, people want to know that and hope are on its way, and then the vaccine rollout. So who from the State Department of Education is keeping an eye on what's happening with the local distribution? If you're not, who is?
Well, it's really done through the health department, and I have weekly calls with the superintendents and the health officers and Dr. Chan. And that's when we provide any updates from the health department to the superintendents and back from the superintendents to the health department. So we do that on Friday mornings at 8 o'clock. So we've been doing that since the beginning.
And have you asked them?
That's how we do that.
And have you asked them how the vaccines are going and have people been vaccinated?
Well, at this point, like I said, it varies depending on the district itself. Some of the districts have had, great success because they are maybe a little smaller than some of the larger districts. But in many of the districts, they're upwards over 50%, some are 100%. So it's rolling out in different ways depending on the number of vaccines that are available in that local district to the health department.
Well, I will, I'm going to go to the next question, but obviously Montgomery County Public Schools, I believe, are going back March 1st and March 15th. And if we're making decisions on a state basis to get kids back in the classroom and the state superintendent and State Department of Education doesn't know right off the hand how many educators are vaccinated and how that's going, as a father and as a senator, I'm obviously a bit concerned about that. But I'm going to Chairman Barnes.
Senator, may I respond
Sure,
to that, please?
sure.
Because, that's a kind of a left criticism there without a response. And
Sure.
basically, I want to just say that having the vaccine was not a requirement, and it is not a requirement for people to come back to school. We've had school systems open since September the 8th across the state and have done so successfully. We've had private schools open successfully since the beginning. We've had childcare settings open successfully since the beginning. The vaccine is not a requirement for us to go back to school.
Chairman Barnes, you've got folks on your end, or?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's a requirement or not doesn't avoid the question, which I think is important, and I hope you'll get back to Chair Zucker on it. But we do have questions on the from the House side. Delegate Bridges.
Thank you, Delegate Chairman Barnes and Chairman Zucker. You still sort of stole a little bit of my thunder on the vaccination question, especially, I think every jurisdiction is wondering, although it may not be something that the CDC says is required, it is still something that, especially in African-American communities, Latinx communities, people are still hesitant about the vaccinations. And so knowing whether or not, especially teachers, are getting those vaccinations in those communities is really important. So, but my question is I can give a different question, and that's along the lines of the broadband issues. And you got to excuse me, I'm new to this subcommittee, so I'm not really familiar with everything that's happening, especially with this digital learning advisory committee. I believe that's what it is now. So I guess my question is, how long has, since COVID-19 has hit, how long has this committee been meeting, and have there been any sort of recommendations that they've already given that, we can sort of look to, or are we looking at what the DLS analyst said as the advice that they should give us moving forward? So has there already been some recommendations that I'm just not aware of?
No, they've been in the process of meeting for over a year now. It was a committee that came from the board, state board, about virtual learning and what kinds of digital access we had and what kind of curriculum we were able to provide to local school systems, professional development and all of those things. So they've been working in those areas. They did a major study to see how many students had devices across the state. That report is available and was given to the state board, something we can definitely provide to the committee. And then in terms of broadband, which is a whole different issue, that is the thing I said is now under the auspices of the housing and community development folks. And we just have a completed MOU sign now that, and here's all the people that are working on it. It's the Department of General Services, the Department of Housing and Community Development, Natural Resources, Department of Transportation, Emergency Medical Services, the Maryland State Police, the Department of Information Technology, of course, Maryland State Department, and also the Research and Education Network. And what we're trying to do by next August, or yes, by this coming August, is to stand up broadband across the state in the way that we probably should have done it years ago, but we didn't know we were going to have a pandemic. And now we're moving very quickly to put short-term fixes in, and then the longer-term fixes will be the towers that have to be built to connect some of the urban areas, because people mistakenly think that urban areas have it all wrapped up, but they don't. And also some of the more rural areas, especially out in the Western Maryland. So thank you for that question.
No, thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Senator Elfreth.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Superintendent. I don't want to beat a dead horse here, but I spend half of my day during this legislative session talking to constituents who are terrified and anxious and confused by the state's vaccine plan. And I think everybody on this call, regardless of party, everybody's constituents are in this same boat. I speak to a lot of educators who are in Anne Arundel County, supposed to return back to the classroom next week. And they only just started getting vaccinated today. So we'll have many who are going back without a first shot. We're only vaccinating, have enough vaccines here in Anne Arundel County for 1,000 public school teachers and 500 non-public and childcare. So I guess it's frustrating, and that frustration is compounded with a decentralized system, with a state system that has moved into 1C before we even frankly began 1B. And that's pushing back, that 1C is pushing out a lot of educators and many of my constituents who are over 75. The calls that I have to make every single day would break anybody's heart. And I can't help them, in large part because of the supply, but also because the state went ahead and moved into 1C before finishing 1B, which includes educators. So I guess if I could ask you to talk to the governor, please, about prioritizing educators. We all want to get life back to normal. All of us want kids back in classrooms. We all agree that is the best option, but we need to do so responsibly. And I'm just not seeing that. I don't think we're seeing that from the top down here. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. So if I could ask, not a question, but a favor, Mr. Chair, if that's appropriate, to please speak to the governor about prioritizing these 1B educators. It's really important.
Yes, and thank you, Senator. I did send a letter in December doing just that, to ask that they even be included in the 1B strand, and thankfully they were. So hopefully, as soon as the supply continues and increases, we'll get that all accomplished. But I did, and I will continue to advocate for those people that you just discussed anytime that I have the opportunity.
Sounds like it might be time for a stronger letter if it was back in December, but we'll look forward to that. We are joined by our chair of our committee, Chair McIntosh. Welcome. We have a
unmute yourself.
yes.
Thank you very much. I'm really interested in this line of questioning, by the way, from the senators, because all of us feeling the pressure about getting our teachers and our frontline personnel in the school system vaccinated. So thank you.
I think we're about to do you proud on the House side because the vice chair has a question. Vice Chair Solomon.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. No pressure or anything. Dr. Salmon, thank you for being here. I have two topics that I wanted to touch on. One, I think will not be surprising to us in the conversations that we had last year around early learning. And I do want to associate myself with the comments of my colleagues. I feel the same way. And actually, I wanted to drill down specifically on vaccines for early learning educators and our childcare providers who, you mentioned have been, frankly, many of them have been operating, many on a shoestring budget, barely holding on since last spring. And obviously, we know childcare providers on average tend to be, women, people of color. They tend to have a lot of comorbidities. So I guess what I wanted from you was a commitment. So MSDE sent out a provider survey, essentially asking providers across the state who were licensed to sign up or give their information if they were willing to be vaccinated. That was sent out a couple of weeks ago at the end of January. I have been trying to work to sort of replicate what was really successful in Baltimore, where the childcare community partnered with Mercy Health System to get vaccination clinics set up, much like many places in the state have done for K-12. And, I appreciate that MDH has been very flexible. As long as you can find groups that fall within those ranges, they're willing to, work with their local health systems across the state to get vaccines out. And so I reached out to your office, I reached out to MDH. I will give your staff, Zach Hands, credit. Zach has been working, but I have not gotten a commitment for that data. There's about 4,500 providers in Montgomery County.
We just sent it to you.
Well, he sent me the numbers. He did not give me.
No, we just sent you the names and the counties today. It should be in your box.
Okay. All right. Well, that is great.
I approved it last night, so hopefully
Okay.
it'll be somewhere in your box, which I'm sure is as full as my box is.
Well, that's great, because what I didn't want was, I don't want the personally identifiable information myself. I want to be able to share that with our county and our health systems who are interested in trying to expedite vaccines for childcare providers. So thank you. And then I guess the second topic, switching gears a little bit, but also related, is around the accountability for our school systems as it relates to Kerwin and questions around what MSDE plans on doing. So, we had, there was a report from DLS on the original tutoring money that was given out based in 2019 and 2020, showed frankly a handful of school districts were not using the money the way that it was supposed to be done. And I think, obviously one of our top priorities as a committee, is making sure that there's adequate recovery dollars going forward. And I guess I'm curious, what kind of accountability is MSDE using on money that's already been out, and what type of accountability measures do you plan on enforcing and holding schools to account for if we're giving them, tremendous amounts of money, frankly, which are needed for recovery, but making sure that those go in the right places?
Well, that's a really great question. And we are going to be rolling out in March what I'm calling Maryland State Department monitoring teams. We are going to use some of our internal state money to fund some additional contractual people to help with this, but we're going to put boots on the ground to go in like we did in the old days, back when I was a superintendent in Talbot County, and the State Department sent people out to provide technical assistance, and we're in your schools providing professional development, making sure that your budget's aligned to what you said what you submitted your grant to do. And we plan on having these teams functioning between April and June to do the technical assistance and the monitoring for all of the ESSERS money that has been given out. And we will be hopefully ensuring that going forward into 2023, that they'll be using those funds for evidence-based programs such as tutoring, such as extended year, such as acceleration academies. Those are the things that we put forth to the state board last month, and that was approved.
And what happens if they're not doing that?
Then that's where the technical assistance comes in. That's where we will, hopefully provide whatever correction we need to make sure our students are getting what they need. I mean, we have to put our kids first right now. The other thing that I'm planning on doing, and you didn't ask me about this, but I don't mind sharing it. I haven't shared it with the state board yet, but plan to do it at our meeting in a couple of weeks. I'm very concerned about mental health of our school children right now. And so I'm thinking about a way that we can do some regional programming to provide more counselors, clinicians, oversight, just like we do with school safety. We have regional offices. I want to try to do the same thing with mental health, because our kids are going to need it going back. I have hundreds of emails every day with pictures of children, videos of children, emails from parents trying to get mental health services for their children. These are children that typically were not on our radar before, but they are really been impacted by being at home for almost a year. And so I think that's going to be another well-used part of our funding.
Thank you. And I haven't yet seen that email. I'm hoping I just haven't come across it yet, but thank you.
Okay. I hope, well, I think Zach is on the call, so he can send it over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairs.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chairman.
Chairman Barnes, I don't see any other questions on my end. Anything you want to add? Any questions on your end before we?
No, I don't think. Thank you, Dr. Sam, for coming before us today and answering our questions. And, we understand the hard work you do. We do, and we don't mean to be hard on you, but getting our teachers vaccinated and getting our kids back in the classroom is there's nothing more important we can be doing right now.
I totally agree with you, sir.
And, when you say you send a letter, that's good. But, I do think maybe it's time for a little stronger action to make sure that our teachers get prioritized. And I hope you'll just take that into consideration. And I know Chair.
It's certainly something I do every week on our weekly calls.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Salmon. I just wanted to, on behalf of the House, they have a hard stop at 1:45, I believe. So so let's just, when we get to the response, let's make sure that we're addressing DLS recommendations and respond to that. So we'll now turn our attention to Morgan State University, starting out with the analyst Ian Klein. Mr. Klein.
Great. I'm going to share my screen right now. Okay, everybody should see the Morgan State analysis. Okay.
We see it. You're on.
Excellent. So I'm going to begin on page 4 with Exhibit 1. This shows undergraduate enrollment from fall 2015 to 2020. Total undergraduate enrollment decreased by 191 students from fall 2020 to fall 2019 to 2020. As illustrated in the exhibit, both the continuing and part-time student populations experienced increases while there were declines in the first-time, full-time, and transfer student populations. Exhibit 2 on page 5 shows enrollment trends by location. For the sixth straight year, the number of in-state undergraduate students declined. The international undergraduate student population has fallen from the 2017 high mark of 780 students to 247 in 2020. These losses were partially offset by a continued increase in the out-of-state student population. Moving to student performance, Exhibit 5 on page 8 provides the second and third year retention rates for first-time, full-time students. Second year retention rate has fallen for the past 2 cohorts and is below the 2013 cohort high mark of 75.3% by 5.3%. The third year retention rate has also steadily declined from the 2014 cohort to the 2017 cohort. Exhibit 6 on page 9 provides the 4- and 6-year graduation rates for first-time, full-time students. As shown in the exhibits, the 4-year graduation rate has been improving, especially from the 2010 to 2015 cohorts, going from 9.7% to 20.9%. The 6-year graduation rate tells a similar story. From the 2005 to 2013 cohort, the 6-year graduation rate has improved by 15.7%, and at 46.4% has reached its highest total in over a decade. Exhibit 7 on page 10 provides the 8-year graduation rate by Pell and non-Pell recipient status. Both non-Pell full-time transfer and non-Pell first-time full-time students were more likely to graduate within 8 years than first-time full-time and full-time transfer Pell recipient students. Pell eligible first-time full-time students and part-time transfer students, both Pell eligible and non-Pell eligible, graduated at the lowest rates. Moving to cost of attendance, Exhibit 10 on page 12 shows the estimated cost of attendance versus the average net price for full-time in-state students by income level between fiscal 2017 and 2019. This exhibit shows that the average cost of attendance over these years was $24,511. However, the actual net price for student when aid was awarded averaged to be $15,773. What this exhibit also shows is that the cost of attendance will vary depending on income level. For example, in fiscal 2019, it cost a student $14,297 with a family income of under $30,000, but $21,880 for a student with a family income of over $110,000. Exhibit 11 on page 13 shows the amount of institutional aid awarded and number of awards provided by category. The amount of institutional aid awarded has increased from $12.4 million in fiscal 2015 to $17.1 million in the fiscal 2021 working budget. Over this period, need-based aid averaged 47% of institutional aid, while merit scholarships and athletic scholarships averaged to be 28% and 25% respectively. Exhibit 12 on page 14 documents the number of students receiving Pell Grants and utilizing other forms of loans. As shown in the exhibit, 3,640 students who were eligible for max Pell Grant funding received just under $17 million of that funding in fiscal 2019. This total represented the largest dollar amount of assistance type utilized by Morgan students. Moving to the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic had on the university, to ensure the safety of its students and personnel, in March, Morgan pivoted to an online learning model. Refunds were provided to students who had made payments for room and board, and with no students on campus, there was a corresponding loss of auxiliary revenue. Exhibit 13 on page 15 provides the fiscal 2020 shortfall, which totaled $12.7 million, and documents the funding sources that were utilized to address that shortfall. Utilizing CARES Act and funding from the state coronavirus relief funding, Morgan was able to eliminate the fiscal 2020 deficit. For the fall 2020 semester, the university continued with a remote-only instruction model. As shown in Exhibit 14 on page 17, to date, the university has identified a fiscal 2021 shortfall of $21.7 million. This shortfall stems from a loss of auxiliary revenue totaling $27.6 million, a loss of tuition and fee revenue totaling $9.4 million, the July Board of Public Works reduction of $9 million, and other revenue losses that encompass the remainder of that shortfall total. After reducing certain institutional expenditures, identifying operational maintenance and academic support expense savings, the university acknowledges a $21.7 million deficit. The university has numerous ways to continue to reduce the identified deficit, including utilizing Consolidated Appropriations Act, or CAA funding, utilizing CAA HBCU funding, utilizing their fiscal 2021 deficiency appropriations, and the additional CARES Act HBCU funding, which was only partially expended in fiscal 2020. DLS asked the president to comment if the institution will be utilizing any of the CARES Act HBCU funding in fiscal 2021 to assist in reducing the deficit, rather than using these funds on additional operating expenditures. The proposed 2022 budget, found on page 19 in Exhibit 15, includes 3 deficiencies for the university: $1.5 million in general funds for COVID-19 related expenditures, $2.5 million in reimbursable funding for public safety personnel, and $2 million in special funds for capital maintenance projects. Total state funds will decrease by $156,000 or 0.1% relative to the fiscal 2021 adjusted budget. These funding changes do not include the CAA funding found at the bottom of the chart, as institutions will have until September 2022 to expend these funds, so this funding may roll over into fiscal 2023. Morgan will also have additional CAA HBCU funding provided to the institution that is not identified here, as these allocations have yet to be made. DLS requests the president to comment on the large increase in other unrestricted funds from fiscal 2020 to fiscal 2021, identifying how this increase aligns with the university's budget given the impact that the COVID-19 pandemic had on the institution. The proposed budget also includes $3 million that are designated for the Center for Urban Health Equity. DLS recommends restricting these funds pending the submission of a report documenting the strategic goals and funding streams for the center. It should also be noted that in December 2020, Morgan received a $40 million unrestricted gift from Mackenzie Scott, the largest gift from a donor in the university's history. DLS asked the president to comment on how Morgan plans to use this gift. Moving to the issues, which begin on page 23 and continue on to page 26. The one issue discussed involves the university's shift to remote learning as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. On these pages, the university provided a host of answers concerning transitioning to remote delivery of academic instruction in the spring, ensuring the quality of courses provided, providing student services remotely, as well as overall challenges and lessons learned that were applied to the fall semester. I won't go through all of those here as they are listed in bullet form on these pages. However, DLS requests the president to further discuss efforts to provide mental health services remotely, as well as comment on how the shift to providing courses and services online provided new opportunities to the university and what that impact will have on the university's future business model. The DLS operating budget recommended action is found on page 27, and as mentioned, that is to restrict $3 million pending the receipt of a report for the Center for Urban Health Equity. With that, I conclude my presentation and would be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Klein, thank you for that thoughtful analysis. Are there any questions for Mr. Klein? I don't see any on my end. Mr. Chairman, you see any on your end? Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. So we'll now turn to Morgan State University, Dr. Wilson and Mr. Sidney Evans. Again, Dr. Wilson, thank you for submitting your written testimony, your thorough written testimony. If you could just hit the highlights and respond directly to the Department of Legislative Services, would be greatly appreciated given our collective time crunch. Dr. Wilson.
Okay. Thank you very much, Senator Zucker and Delegate Barnes. Certainly, I'll hit the highlights because we did submit the written testimony to you. We always want to thank the General Assembly for the continuing support of Morgan State University. These are challenging times, but these are also times of great momentum for Morgan. In our written testimony, we, of course, indicated the tremendous progress that we've made here at Morgan over the last decade. We have reached 10 straight years of retention rates above 70%. That is really, historic for us. We've never been in this territory before. We now have the largest, highest graduation rate in our history here at Morgan. And so we're very, very appreciative with the kind of progress that we're making there. Our alumni continue to support the institution at the level that they can. And so we continue to lead the state of Maryland in public institutions with regard to the percent of our alumni giving per year. Believe it or not, at about 15%, that is the highest amongst all public institutions in the state of Maryland. We continue to rise in terms of our research. We had as a goal 10 years ago that we wanted to move from doctoral research university, moderate research, to doctoral research university, high research activity. And we achieved that goal in 2018, and we're very, very pleased with that. We just submitted an economic impact study showing the state the return on the investment that is being made in Morgan. And so on an annual basis, that's about $1.1 billion in terms of what Morgan is returning to the state, almost 600 million of that in Baltimore City. And that investment you're making in us is creating about 7,000 jobs in the state of Maryland as well. We do want to bring to the attention of the committees the fact that for every $10 million in research invested in Morgan, you can see based on what we have put before you in our written testimony, that we have the highest rate of return of any research institution in the state of Maryland per every $10 million invested. We produce, for example, the largest number of startup companies for every $10 million of research, the largest number of patents for every $10 million in research, et cetera. And so that's one of the reasons why we're excited to move forward in terms of elevating our research mission. We appreciate the investments that are being made in Morgan as well on the capital side. I will not repeat those, Senator Zucker and Delegate Barnes. You can see those as well, but we are.
Dr. Wilson, let me just interrupt you here on a couple things. First, we do need to get to the issues because we are back on the floor at 2. And I also need to apologize to you and the other presenters. I've been called into another meeting. So Vice Chair Solomon, if it's okay with you, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair Solomon will take over.
Okay.
And I'm sorry. Thank you all very much.
Right. And so I'll just skip everything else and go straight to the questions. And so the first question that you asked me to address, I'm going to ask Mr. Sidney Evans to summarize that within 30 seconds in terms of how we plan to use the CARES Act to close the deficit that we have accumulated. Mr. Evans.
You just need to take yourself off mute, Mr. Evans.
Okay, if you can't do that, I'll go on and address it real quickly.
He's got it. He's got it.
Nah.
Mr. Evans. Oh, he just muted himself again. Okay, Dr. Wilson, you go.
Okay, so certainly we appreciate.
Okay, I have it now. You'd have to. Then it goes.
Okay, actually, to be respectful of the time, I'm just going to continue. Thank you, Mr. Evans. But in response, you can see here that yes, we do plan to use the CARES Act dollars initially to address the budget deficit that we have accumulated, and then we will continue to use those dollars in addition to any other federal dollars we get in conformity with what the regulations would allow us to do. And so that is the quick answer to that. With regard to comment number 2 should comment on the large increase in unrestricted funds from fiscal 20 to 2021. I think based on what Mr. Klein has indicated, of course, we had a reduction of $8.9 million. We, of course, did not go forward to increase tuition. We had a loss of revenue in auxiliaries and other revenue as well. And so given that, the university is planning to use all available funds that we have at our disposal to make sure that we are continuing to operate on a strong fiscal foundation. I should comment on how we plan to use the gift from Ms. Mackenzie Scott. I want to say in this, certainly thank her for her investment in Morgan and our we have already put that money in an unrestricted endowment account in our foundation. This is a transformational gift, it's not a spending gift. And so I'm holding out $2 million of that because we have to report to her only for 3 years on how we plan to use the gift. We use $500,000 of that to jumpstart our Center for Urban Research Equity here at Morgan. And the state has responded by giving us an appropriation of $3 million per year to maintain that. And I am investing $1 million in academic affairs to encourage faculty members and students to tackle issues of social justice and jumpstart some additional research initiatives that could lead to greater federal dollars. And then $500,000 of that over 3 years for student financial aid. And so you asked me to comment as well on mental health. This is, of course, like many things here at Morgan, the top of our list. Senator Zucker, I did take a couple of online courses last spring to get a sense for the kind of experiences that our students are having. And I indicated to you in a highlighted overview that I have a clear sense of what's going on with our students, both in terms of the online environment, as well as all of the other issues that they're confronted with at home, in the community. And it is overwhelming. And for any university president or chancellor to sit here and say that our students are not impacted emotionally and psychologically and mentally, with all due respect to my colleagues, they wouldn't do this, but they would be prevaricating. Because every single student in American higher education is being impacted. And so as such, we have really ratcheted up our counseling services. We, of course, are doing telecounseling. We run into some challenges that we would ask the legislature to take a look at. And it is that different states have different kind of restrictions. And so we have to work through all of those restrictions in order to provide telecounseling to students who don't live in state. And then finally, we also are implementing this semester in response to what we're hearing from our students, a course here in mindfulness. It's a 1-credit course. It is actually being patterned after a course that's being offered at the University of Southern California. That course right now has reached maximum capacity in terms of enrollment. In terms of the recommendations, you had 2 recommendations of us. The first was that the funding for the Center for Urban Health Equity should actually be held until a report is given on how we plan to use those dollars. And we have no objection to that recommendation. And we have no objection to the language that the analyst has added. And we look forward to adding those details and getting those to you by the deadline. So hopefully I was respectful of the time. You know, I have a lot to say about Morgan, and I really appreciate every opportunity that we can get to say to the state, thank you for the investment. Hold us really at a high standard for giving you a very high return.
Thank you very much. Mr. President, are there any questions for the president? Let's see, Chair Solomon, you see any on your end?
No, I don't. Dr. Wilson, thank you. Thank you for being here. Appreciate all the work that you're doing to get your students through, and really appreciate the work that Morgan State did, particularly during the crisis. I know your university really stepped up. We appreciate you being here, and I think the gift that you all received is a recognition of the fantastic work that you're doing. So exciting to see what comes next.
Thank you, Delegate Solomon.
And with that, Chair Solomon, I'm going to turn it over to you to continue with the agenda and close us out today.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess we will call up the budget for University. So Sarah Baker, if you can give the overview of the analysis.
Okay. Let me just get this up here on the screen. Okay, I'm going to start with Exhibit 1, which shows a change in the fall undergraduate enrollment. And for the second year, enrollment declined by 4.5%. The number of first-time students fell by over 14%, and transfers are down for a third year, falling about 13%. Now, Exhibit 2 shows a trend in first-time applications, and while the number of applications did increase 1.5% in 2020, the number who ultimately enrolled fell 13.4%. Since 2018, the number of applicants who have enrolled has dropped 20.3%. And you'll note that the steep decline in the number of applications in 2015 is related to Towson's decision to stop using the Common App. Exhibit 3 shows the second and third year retention rates. And overall, the second rate has exceeded 84% and the third year has exceeded 77%. Exhibit 4 shows a 6-year graduation rate. and why the gap for African American students slightly widened with the 2015 cohort. All groups exceed 70%. Exhibit 5 shows the 8-year graduation rate of Pell and non-Pell students. And in general, full-time transfer students graduate at the highest rate, but less than a third of the part-time transfer Pell students will earn a degree in 8 years. Moving on to institutional aid, Exhibit 7 shows spending on aid. And expenditures on aid has increased 4.4 million from 2015 to 2019, which also funded an additional 1,400 awards. Need-based aid accounted for 1.7 million of the increase and over 1,000 of those awards, implying White House awarded more need-based aid, the amount of awards declined. Moving on to the impact of COVID-19 on the 2020 budget, as shown in Exhibit 9. Between shifting to remote learning, sending students home, and providing them refunds, Towson lost revenue loss was about $35 million. They also incurred an additional $3.1 million related to COVID expenses, resulting in an overall shortfall of $38.1 million. The reductions to the operating budget covered almost 70% of the shortfall, and the federal and state CARES funds covered the rest of it. As you may recall, a few days before they were going to start the fall semester, Towson switched to remote learning, sent students home, and this was due to a spike in the positivity rate that could not be traced back to any specific event. So this led to a greater loss of revenue, which is shown in Exhibit 10. Between auxiliary tuition fees and the BPW reduction, the overall revenue loss was estimated to be $76.5 million. When combined with the $2 million of COVID-related costs, they're looking at a $78.5 million shortfall. Again, reductions to the operating budget will cover about 63% of the shortfall. Their two proposed deficiencies would provide $4.3 million in state CRF funds, and the fund balance would recover the remaining $25 million shortfall. Turning to Exhibit 11 in the proposed budget, you'll see that state funds decreased $3.2 million or 2.3%. However, if you just exclude the deficiency, state funds actually increased 1.2 million or 0.9%. Other unrestricted funds increased 43.9 million, of which 37.9 is related to an increase in auxiliary revenues, implying that Towson is anticipating a return to more normal operations in 2022. And also just to note, in 21, Towson will receive a total of 27.8 million of the Consolidated Appropriations Fund, of which 8.7 million must be used for financial aid. Exhibit 12 shows unrestricted funds by source, and the impact of COVID can be seen with the auxiliary making up less of the revenues of 20 and 21, while state funds comprise a greater portion. And the one issue I have is switching to remote learning. Now, Towson faced 3 challenges in the quick shift during the middle of the spring semester, and they're listed in the first 3 bullets. The major one being that faculty and most of the faculty have never taught online. Another was to make sure that students had technology to complete the semester. As listed the bullets towards the bottom of the page, Towson expanded its assistance to instructor in preparation of the fall semester and has taken many actions to ensure the quality of their courses, which are listed here on the top of the next page. To ensure continued success of its students, Towson also needed to transition its student services on its online environment, and some of the activities are shown at the last set of bullets. So we asked the president to comment on how the transition of courses and student services to remote environment has shifted their thinking on how they will deliver programs and services, opportunities this opens up, and the impact it will have on the business model. And finally, the recommendations is to see the system overview for system-wide recommendations. And that concludes my presentation.
Thank you, Ms. Baker. Are there any questions from the committee for the analyst? Mr. Chair, I don't see any. All right, well, we will call up President Schatzel. Thank you for joining us and your team, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I'm here with Vice President Ben Lowenthal as well. But let me begin by saying, Chair Zucker, Vice Chair Solomon, and members of the Senate and House subcommittees, I just want to thank you for the opportunity to talk to you today. And given these truly unprecedented times, we appreciate the continuing commitment that President Ferguson, Speaker Jones, Chairs Gazzoni and McIntosh, as well as all of you, have shown to higher education. Today, it's my honor and privilege to have this opportunity to talk to you. It's my third time in my 5 years as president of Towson to provide this testimony. As the second largest university in the university system of Maryland and the largest university, public or private, in Greater Baltimore, frankly, Towson University is an important and powerful asset of our state, and we are 100% committed to our role as an anchor institution. So in short, as I like to say, TU does indeed matter to Maryland. I want to begin by thanking you and your colleagues for your support of the new science complex. It's right behind me over here. And I'm pleased to report that this building, the largest academic space in our campus, is open to faculty and students. The state-of-the-art complex is pivotal to our mission to build and grow Maryland's STEM pipeline. And I really look forward to a time, hopefully later this spring, when we can all gather together to celebrate its completion with a ribbon cutting. I also want to make sure to recognize and thank Sarah Baker for her thoughtful and comprehensive review and analysis. So I'll keep my remarks brief today, but I do want to highlight a few areas that demonstrate TU's value proposition. As a nationally ranked university, where we deliver on our promise of inclusive student success, as well as the fact that we are a nationally ranked university. As I said, TU indeed does matter to Maryland. More than 86% of our 170,000 alumni stay in Maryland after graduation. And they just don't live here, they lead here. And that includes a few members of the committee that are gathered here today. Towson University is the largest provider of healthcare professionals in our state. And in both May and December of this last year, our prepared graduates completed their coursework early and went straight to the front lines to fight COVID-19. They helped fill a workforce gap that is only increasing based on the pandemic. 23,000 unfilled positions in healthcare. That is the shortfall facing Maryland today, and TU is stepping into that gap to be able to fill it. This past fall, TU was recognized as one of the top 100 public universities in the nation, and we are very, very proud of that achievement. But more so, I'm incredibly proud of the fact that TU has become a nationally recognized leader in inclusive student success. With an enrollment of nearly 23,000 students, or 20% of the entire enrollment of the USM residential campuses, Towson University has accounted for 68% of the growth of minority student enrollment in the USM over the last 5 years, since my arrival as president. With over 44% of its students identifying as students of color, TU enrolls over 5,300 African-American students, more than any other campus in the USM, and second only to Morgan State University in our state, by about 300 students. But this is not just about enrollment. It's about student success. It's about obtaining a university degree. TU has the second highest graduation rate amongst all of Maryland's public universities. But most important, TU is the only public university with a zero achievement gap. All students succeed at Towson University. And in fact, Towson University's African-American students graduate at a higher rate than our general student population. Another first for our state.
Madam President, if you can get to the DLS.
Yep.
Thank you.
I was just about to go there. So thank you. It's hard for presidents not to be able to talk about it. And I think the issue of inclusive success, particularly in light of the pandemic itself and the disproportionate impact, is something that I really wanted to emphasize. So I appreciate that. DLS has asked us to address the shift to the remote learning. And although the pandemic has further exacerbated the issues that have arisen from the digital divide, I can tell you, and I think we've all experienced, that the issues are systemic. Access to Wi-Fi that works is imperative. It's also very, very challenging for a student that is sharing learning space with other family members, or the fact that they're also working remotely at home. It's challenging if they're living in areas without reliable Wi-Fi and often difficult to be able to afford. So these access challenges are disproportionately impacting our most vulnerable populations. We expect that remote learning will work the best at the graduate level, though we will offer more individual undergraduate courses online to offer the greatest flexibility to the students. but we still believe face-to-face education results in the best possible educational outcomes for our undergraduate student population. And research supports that. It indicates that a residential or a complete campus experience positively impacts completion rates for all undergraduate students. So in closing, I greatly appreciate your support, which allows Towson University to succeed inclusively. Again, thank you very much for everything that you're doing, not only to support Towson, but all the work that you're doing in Annapolis, as well as supporting higher education. So I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Dr. Schatzel, or President Schatzel. Appreciate obviously all the work that Towson has done, particularly on the graduation, the lack of a graduation gap. I did have one quick question for you. I know obviously Towson, educates a lot of our teachers in the state, and just sort of curious, your thoughts on the possibility of having, potentially a teacher shortage with a lot of folks retiring, and what Towson may be doing to try to increase recruitment, particularly among diverse student applicants for teaching positions.
We have historically been a provider of about 20%, 25% of Maryland's teachers. It's an area that I can share with you is an important part of our curriculum and in our College of Education. We work very, very hard to outreach, particularly to groups of populations that aren't represented, to be able to provide that. We have a variety of programs within the College of Education that provide mentorship and support to students, as well as outreach to not just high school, but we start that outreach in middle school and lower school to be able to provide for interest and to be able to support the interest of students that want to be able to pursue that important and most honorable profession.
Great, thank you. Thank you again for all your work. Any questions from the House Committee? Seeing none, Mr. Chair, I'll throw it back over to you.
The only thing I would add is just wanted to flag for everyone that members are coming in and out. They have bill hearings, and I know the House is getting ready to convene soon. Just wanted to take this opportunity to thank both presidents for their time, and the superintendent as well. I don't see any questions on our end. Chair Solomon, if you want to close this down.
Just would echo your sentiments. Thank you, President Schatzel and President Wilson, and thank you also for being flexible. I know this isn't ideal, but we appreciate your working with us.
Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody.